Hello and welcome to this week's special briefing from the World Retail Congress. This week we have a slightly different approach because we're looking not only at our theme of high velocity retail, which is the driving theme for the World Retail Congress in 2019, but we're looking specifically at the consumer and their role within this high velocity retail world. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Carla Buzasi, who's the Managing Director of WGSN, which is the leading global trends forecasters who have done an enormous amount of work and do consistently all through the year look at consumers right around the world, but have been working closely with us to look specifically at the consumer, the high velocity consumer, and the impact it has on the high velocity retail world. So firstly, welcome Carla, thank you for joining me. And taking what I was just saying there about this high velocity retail world, what is the role of the consumer within that? Are they the key driving force? And is there a particular demographic, if I can use that word, of consumer that is really leading that charge?
So I think there are two driving forces. One is obviously huge amounts of innovation in technology. That combined with the consumer who is as influenced by that technology innovation as the retail spaces come together, and that's why you've seen this huge impact at retail. Every consumer group has been affected by the changes in technology, have been the changes that we've seen through smartphones and the influences that they have. I think you can't underestimate millennials as the first generation who grew up with smartphones. But actually, I think what's really interesting right now is that younger generation, Gen Z, coming through. This is a generation that haven't just grown up with it. It's part and parcel of everything they do. They are at their most natural when they've got a phone in their hand, and they're beginning to spend large amounts of money as well. I mean, the eldest of them are kind of in their early 20s at the moment. So don't underestimate any generational power in this space, but it is that kind of younger demographic that's really driving it.
So you've touched on a few points there, but what would you say are the key unifying factors of consumer change that retailers are feeling the most, that perhaps they should be most aware of?
That they want everything faster. You know, it's kind of that simple. We are impatient right now if we can't get hold of the goods we want to buy, the people we want to connect to immediately, because there are brands, there are retailers, there are technology platforms that enable us to do that. And if their competitors are unable to do that, then there is always an alternative out there.
So does that mean, and we've heard it said often before, that brand loyalty is breaking down because of those factors, or is that a myth that people are still loyal to certain brands?
I think brand loyalty has broken down because there's this huge smorgasbord of choice right now. But I don't think that means that you can't, as a brand, connect with a consumer on a regular basis. Consumers are looking for brands that deliver trust to them in a way that big corporations, big banks are no longer doing. And therefore, you have the opportunity to create that dialogue and create that relationship with the consumer right now. But you need to deliver on it as well, because again, if you fail to do so and you break that trust, then they're not going to come back a second time.
So taking all that technology, particularly mobile, as you've mentioned there, it's often said that the way that consumers are using it and adapting it and using it as their tool for shopping, that the role of the store is clearly changing, but almost is becoming moribund, and in many cases the future of the physical retail space, you know, in a generation's time may no longer be anything like what we've seen today. But equally I've seen research about Generation Z that actually they do quite like going to stores, physical spaces. What do you see as what is going on there?
What do I think there? So I think in a decade, stores will not look anything like they look today, but I don't think they will have disappeared completely. Again, multiple generations have an impact on that. I think there's a huge opportunity for retailers here to fill the void that has been taken away by smartphones, which is personal interaction. We still do like speaking to people. We like in real life experiences. That's why people are still spending money on going to festivals and concerts and things like that. And numerous data points will show you that the more time an individual spends in a store and interacting with a store assistant, the more likely they are to buy and the more money they will spend. So I think this is an opportunity for retailers to really invest in their assistants, their associates, and how they train them, and also make that store experience, make people feel something. It's so much more difficult to create emotions in a digital space. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult, and you have that opportunity in your store. So why would you not take it?
So really, I think technology ought to become, has a greater role to play, but really should be more invisible in terms of the physical space. It shouldn't be just gimmicks, should it?
I get so impatient with businesses that rely on gimmicks, and I know why it happens. The latest new technology comes out, you want to be seen as an early adopter of that, a leader in the space, but there's no point using technology for technology's sake. If you use it to enhance the experience of the consumer, then everybody wins through that. It's worth the money, it's worth the investment. That doesn't mean you don't test things, and I would always urge brands to be testing and innovating, but don't do things just for the sake of ticking a box and saying you were there first.
So I'm also really interested, because at WGSN you spend your working lives looking at consumers, studying consumers all over the world, and such a lot is written about millennials and now Generation Z. But as I say, to give us some context, do you see those generations as probably the greatest in terms of what the impact has been that they are making on our society and the way we lead our lives compared to, say, previous generations, like the famous baby boom generation?
No,
how would you
I don't think that they have had necessarily more of an impact, but I think that the infiltration of their influence is perhaps wider than we might have seen with previous generations, because it touches the home, it touches the workspace, it touches retail, it touches government. There isn't a sort of facet of our lives that hasn't been affected by these younger generations. But that's also because of the huge advances in technology at the same time. But what I think for all brands and retailers is that you can't just obsess about these younger generations, because that's kind of the problem. Everyone's gone, right, we must appeal to millennials, we must appeal to Gen Z, and have forgotten these slightly older generations who have huge spending power and are looking for brands that are listening to them and delivering something to them. So we're kind of coining the phrase the lost generation about Gen X, which sits between boomers and millennials, and it's a smaller age group, so it doesn't get written about so much, it doesn't get so much airtime, but they have money to spend. Their children are growing up right now, their parents are still alive, they've got money to spend on travel, on experiences, on product, and I would urge all retailers not just to obsess about the youth. Be thinking about them, because they're definitely your future consumer, but are you thinking about the people who can spend money right now on your products, and what do they want from a retail experience?
I was going to ask about that lost generation, because I know it's something you feel passionately about that isn't talked about.
I do feel passionately about it because I just fit in it. I miss being a millennial by just over 2 months, so I do feel very passionately about this generation. But look, at WGSN, we really focus in on different demographics at different times, depending on what's going on in the world and how we think brands and retailers need support. We've done an awful lot on millennials, as you can imagine, and we did a big deep dive on Gen Z last year, which is still feeling its impact. But we've looked slightly older now, which is why we've really identified as Gen X, and boomers obviously play a part, but there's this generational kind of gap that's being missed. It's not being talked about, it's not really being written about, and I don't think retailers are thinking about it. And what we're saying is there is a huge opportunity here for the certain kind of retailers, not every single one. There's a huge opportunity for some retailers, and we're really excited to talk to them more about that.
So you'll be joining us at this year's World Retail Congress,
yes,
as you did last year. You were one of our most popular speakers.
You have to say that because I'm sitting here, right?
No, it's true. But can you give us a flavour of what you'll be, because I know what you'll be talking about this year will be based on further research and work that you're doing. I mean, can you give us a little flavour of what we can expect to hear from, and what sort of message you would like to impart to the retailers at the Congress? So
what we want is a message of positivity, which is retail's not dead, that there are huge opportunities. These aren't opportunities that are going to require 5 years, 10 years investment. There are things that you can do right now. We are going to focus on Gen X, not just my decision, that has been taken collectively, but we are going to focus on Gen X because we think there is a niche here that multiple retailers can benefit from. So we're going to talk about what we found about this demographic across multiple different countries and multiple different regions, and what they want, how they feel, which in many cases is forgotten, and what will drive them into store and what will mean that they will engage with your brand and buy your product time and time again.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you to the Congress and finding more about that. And Carla, thank you for joining us today to tell us more about the changing consumer. As we've heard from Carla, it's a huge and hugely important topic to really understand the consumer, and don't just look at it in one sort of sweeping sort of statement about the changing consumer. There's lots of different variations that you as retailers need to focus on, and it will form a major focus for this year's World Retail Congress and its theme of high velocity retail. Thank you again to Carla for joining me this morning, and we look forward to seeing you in Amsterdam to join in this discussion on May the 14th to 16th. Thank you.